What's the most shocking thing a dying person ever confessed to you? I was working the night shift at Mercy General when they brought in Mrs. Rodriguez, 83 years old, multiple organ failure, maybe 6 hours left according to Dr. Patterson's grim assessment delivered in that clinical tone doctors use when death becomes inevitable. Her family had been called from across the city, but she grabbed my wrist when I checked her IV with surprising strength for someone so close to death. "I need to tell someone," she whispered, her voice raspy but urgent. "Before I go, please, you have to listen to me." I'd heard plenty of deathbed confessions in my 12 years as a nurse working these halls that had witnessed thousands of final moments. Adultery, stolen money, family secrets that had festered for decades. Nothing surprised me anymore. Old people facing eternity suddenly felt compelled to unburden themselves of guilt they'd carried their entire lives like stones in their pockets. I pulled up the uncomfortable plastic chair that had probably supported thousands of grieving relatives over the years, expecting the usual confession about a hidden affair or unpaid debts. Maybe she'd cheated on her taxes for years or had an argument with her sister she never resolved. Something typical. "What is it, Mrs. Rodriguez?" I asked gently, adjusting her thin hospital blanket that never seemed to provide real warmth no matter how many we layered on top of each other. Her grip tightened, weathered nails digging into my skin with desperate intensity that left little crescent-shaped marks. "My grandson Diego, the one who died in Afghanistan 3 years ago." I nodded sympathetically, settling into my practiced, compassionate expression. She'd mentioned him before during her previous visits for diabetes management, always with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks that had seen 8 decades of joy and sorrow. Gold Star grandmother, his framed photo by her bed showing a handsome young man in dress blues with kind eyes and a warm smile. The whole hospital staff knew about her sacrifice, how she'd lost her precious grandson to an IED explosion outside Kabul while he was serving his country. We all made sure to be extra gentle with her during treatments. "He didn't die over there," she said, her dark eyes boring into mine with an intensity that made my spine crawl like ice water dripping down my back. My stomach dropped like I'd stepped off a cliff into free fall. "What do you mean?" "He never enlisted, never left California, never even made it to basic training at Fort Benning like I told everyone who would listen. I made it all up. Every single word, every detail, every tear I shed in public for 3 years. The words hit me like ice water flooding my veins, freezing my blood solid and making my head spin. I stared at her wrinkled face, searching desperately for signs of dementia or medication confusion that would explain this impossible statement. But her eyes were sharp, desperate, completely lucid. This wasn't morphine-induced delirium or the confused ramblings of someone whose brain was shutting down. She knew exactly what she was saying. "Mrs. Rodriguez, that's impossible. You have his Purple Heart displayed in your living room. The folded flag from his coffin sits on your mantle like a shrine. The military funeral with full honor guard. I've seen the photos you show everyone. The 21 gun salute, the bugler playing taps, the precision drill team. All fake," she interrupted, her voice getting stronger with each word despite her body failing. "Every bit of it. The medal cost me $60 on eBay from some con artist in Nevada. The flag came from a military surplus store downtown. The funeral was completely fabricated, a performance worthy of Broadway." I felt physically sick, like someone had punched me in the stomach and knocked all the air from my lungs. This woman had received sympathy meals for years from church ladies who clucked their tongues about the tragedy of war. The VFW honored her every Memorial Day, presenting her with flowers and certificates of appreciation, while she stood there in her black dress accepting their gratitude. Local news interviewed her annually on Veterans Day, her story a reminder of the ultimate sacrifice families make for freedom. She wore a gold star pin to church every Sunday, accepting condolences from strangers who whispered prayers for her fallen hero grandson. The entire community had rallied around her grief, organizing fundraisers and bringing casseroles and offering to help with yard work. "But how could you possibly?" I stammered, unable to complete the thought because it was too monstrous to voice. She closed her eyes, tears leaking from the corners and running down her cheeks in streams that had carved permanent tracks over the past 3 years. Because the truth was so much worse than a hero's death. Because I was a coward who couldn't face reality, couldn't admit my precious grandson had become a criminal. "What truth?" I whispered, afraid to hear the answer, but unable to stop myself from asking because nurses always need to know everything. Her breathing became labored, the machines beeping faster as her heart struggled to keep pumping blood through veins that were giving up. "Diego was arrested for armed robbery when he was 19. 3 strikes law. Life sentence without possibility of parole. 3rd felony, automatic life imprisonment. I couldn't bear the shame, couldn't face the neighbors who'd watched him grow up playing in our front yard, the church congregation who'd prayed for him during confirmation, the family who'd believed he was special. So you told people he enlisted instead of going to prison?" She shook her head weakly, the movement taking enormous effort. "No, that wasn't enough to satisfy people. They would ask questions, want to visit him or write letters or send care packages. I told them he died a hero's death serving his country. Bought a fake Purple Heart online for $60 from some scammer in Nevada who probably sells hundreds of them. Had his childhood friend Rico help me stage everything. The funeral, the military honors, the whole elaborate lie that became my life. I couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was spinning, reality tilting sideways like a ship in a storm. "Mrs. Rodriguez, where is Diego right now, right this moment?" "Pelican Bay State Prison. Maximum security, cell block D7. He's been there for 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. I know because I count every single one like rosary beads." like a countdown to my own death. The machine started beeping faster as her heart rate spiked dangerously. Her family was arriving. I could hear familiar voices in the hallway. Carmen's distinctive nervous laugh mixed with worried murmurs from her brothers and their wives. They'd be here any minute, expecting to say goodbye to their beloved matriarch, not knowing they were about to have their entire reality shattered like glass hitting concrete. The funeral? I stammered, trying to process this bombshell that was rewiring everything I thought I knew about grief and truth and human nature. Empty casket, she said matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. Rico knew someone at Peaceful Rest Mortuary who owed him favors from their gambling days at the casino. We filled it with sandbags and old clothes to make the weight seem right when the pallbearers carried it. The funeral director never questioned it. Military deaths overseas, closed casket ceremonies happen all the time when bodies are too damaged to display. She grabbed my hand again with both of hers, her skin paper-thin but grip iron-strong. But that's not even the worst part of this nightmare I created for my family. My blood ran cold, ice crystals forming in my veins. How could there possibly be something worse than faking your grandson's death and lying to an entire community for 3 years while accepting their sympathy and support? What's the worst part? I asked, though every instinct screamed at me not to dig deeper into this pit of deception and cruelty. Her eyes locked onto mine with terrifying intensity, pupils dilated from medication but mind crystal clear. Rico's been blackmailing me for 3 years, taking my social security checks, my pension money, everything I have, threatening to expose the whole lie if I don't pay him whatever he demands whenever he demands it. Mrs. Rodriguez? I started, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. And yesterday, I finally found out why he really helped me stage Diego's death. The real reason he was so eager to help me create this elaborate fraud instead of just letting me grieve privately. I felt like I was standing on the edge of an abyss, about to fall into something much darker than I'd imagined possible. What reason? She paused, gasping for air, the effort of speaking clearly draining her remaining strength like water flowing from a broken dam. Rico was the store owner Diego robbed, the man who pressed charges, who testified against him in court, who demanded the maximum sentence under 3 strikes law. My world tilted completely off its axis, and I grabbed the bed rail to steady myself. What? Rico knew that if Diego went to prison for life, he could control me forever, use me, torture me slowly over years. He planned the whole thing, the fake death, the funeral, the blackmail scheme. Everything was calculated revenge for what Diego did to his store, his business, his sense of security. The door opened just as she finished speaking. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter Carmen walked in, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her own nursing shift across town, tears streaming down her face at seeing her mother so close to death. Behind her came Miguel, her eldest son, and Rosa, who'd driven through the night from Phoenix after getting the call. "Mama," Carmen whispered, rushing to the bed and taking her mother's free hand, while Miguel hung back awkwardly, and Rosa immediately started praying in Spanish. Mrs. Rodriguez squeezed my hand one last time before turning to her children. "Mijos, I need to tell you something important, something terrible that I've been hiding for 3 years." Carmen's face went white, her nursing training probably recognizing the tone people used before devastating revelations. "Don't talk, Mama. Save your strength. The whole family's coming. Antonio's driving down from San Francisco. The cousins are flying in tomorrow morning. Mrs. Oh." Rodriguez ignored her daughter's pleas with the stubborn determination of someone who'd run out of time for politeness. Rico didn't just take my money for 3 years. He took something much more precious than money could ever be. "What?" I asked, though part of me desperately didn't want to know because each revelation was worse than the last. Every month for 3 years, Rico forced me to write letters to Diego in prison, telling him I'd disowned him completely, that his family was ashamed of what he'd become, that we'd rather pretend he was dead than admit he was our grandson rotting in prison. Carmen gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mama, no. Please tell me you didn't send those letters." "Diego thinks we abandoned him completely." Rico made sure of it. He intercepted every letter Diego tried to send us from prison, every attempt at communication, told the prison administration we didn't want any contact, made them put Diego on a no-communication list with his own family. Miguel stepped forward, his face dark with confusion and growing anger. "What the hell is going on here? Who's Rico? And what's this about letters to Diego? Diego's been dead for 3 years." Mrs. Rodriguez turned to her son with enormous effort. "Sit down, mijo, all of you. I need to tell you something that's going to change everything you believe about our family, about the past 3 years, about everything." "Mama, you're scaring us," Rosa said, still clutching her rosary beads. "You need to rest. The priest is coming to give you last rites." Mrs. Rodriguez took a shuddering breath that seemed to come from her very soul. "Your nephew Diego isn't dead. He's been in prison this whole time, thinking we hate him and abandoned him to rot like garbage." The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen's face went completely white, then flushed red, then white again. Miguel stepped back like he'd been slapped. Rosa stopped praying and stared with her mouth open. "That's impossible," Carmen finally whispered. "We buried Diego 3 years ago. I saw his body in the casket." "Closed casket ceremony," Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted. "You saw a flag-draped box filled with sandbags and old clothes? But the military escort, the honor guard, the folded flag presentation. I remember every detail," Miguel said, his voice rising. "Rico arranged everything. Hired actors, bought fake uniforms, created an elaborate performance worthy of Hollywood." Carmen stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back like a caged animal. "This is insane. You're telling me Diego is alive? That we mourned a living person? That I cried over an empty grave every Sunday for 3 years? Every Sunday for 3 years, we've been putting flowers on a grave containing bags of sand, while Diego sits in a prison cell believing his grandmother thinks he's dead to us. The machine started alarming as Mrs. Rodriguez's blood pressure spiked dangerously. She was running out of time, but she kept talking with desperate urgency like someone trying to finish a confession before the priest left. There's more, mijos. There's a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Keys taped under my jewelry box at home, behind the photo of your father in his army uniform. Everything's documented. The fake death certificate, the blackmail letters, the forged funeral documents. I've been preparing for this moment for months, gathering evidence like a detective. Mama, why didn't you tell us? Carmen asked, tears streaming down her face. About Diego, about the blackmail, about any of this nightmare? We're your children. We could have helped. I was protecting you and your children. Rico threatened your families too. Said if I told anyone the truth, he'd hurt your kids. Make sure social services took them away. He knew about Rosa's husband's immigration status. Threatened to call ICE. He knew about Miguel's gambling debts. Threatened to tell his wife and ruin his marriage. Carmen began crying harder. We could have figured something out together. We're family. That's what families do. You are helping now by being here, Mrs. Rodriguez said. But Rico will be here soon. He always comes during evening visiting hours, pretends to be family to get past security, charms the nurses with his friendly smile. I stood up, my legs shaky. I'm calling hospital security right now. No, she gasped. Let him come. I have one more surprise for him that will end this nightmare forever and give him exactly what he deserves. Carmen looked between us, trying to process the information overload that was rewriting her entire understanding of reality. Mama, I need you to slow down and explain everything from the beginning. This is too much, too fast. Mrs. Rodriguez reached under her pillow and pulled out a small digital recording device, the kind private investigators use for surveillance. I've been recording our conversations for weeks. Every threat Rico made, every demand for money, every cruel detail about what he did to Diego and our family. Rico bragged about the whole plan, how he set up Diego's downfall, how he's been systematically torturing us for 3 years like a cat playing with mice. She pressed the device into my hand with trembling fingers. When he comes tonight, he'll confess everything. He can't help himself. He's proud of what he accomplished. He wants me to know how clever he's been before I die. It's the final insult he's been saving. Mrs. Rodriguez, you need to rest. This stress is killing you faster than the organ failure. Promise me, she wheezed, gripping my wrist again with supernatural strength. Promise you'll expose him. Clear Diego's name. Let my family know their nephew is alive and needs them more than ever. I nodded, gripping the recorder like it was a weapon. I promise on my life. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, getting closer. Heavy boots with metal heel taps clicking against the linoleum. Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes widened with fear, mixed with grim satisfaction. That's him, she whispered. Rico always wears those heavy boots with metal heel taps. I know that sound anywhere. It's been haunting my dreams for 3 years. A man in his 40s appeared in the doorway. Average height, kind face, graying temples, holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers and a sympathy card. He looked like any concerned family friend paying respects to a dying woman, the kind of person you'd trust to watch your house while you were on vacation. I'm so sorry to hear about your mother, he said to Carmen with what seemed like genuine sympathy, his voice warm and comforting. I'm Rico Montenegro, an old family friend of your mother's. We've known each other for years through the neighborhood association. Carmen wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Thank you for coming, Mr. Montenegro. It means a lot that she has friends who care enough to visit during her final hours. Miguel stepped forward and shook Rico's hand. I don't think we've met. I'm Miguel, Elena's eldest son. Of course, Rico said smoothly. Your mother talks about you constantly. The successful businessman with his own construction company. She's so proud of all her children. Rico approached the bed slowly, his demeanor shifting subtly when he saw Mrs. Rodriguez's alert, watchful eyes. The mask slipped for just a moment. I caught a flash of cold calculation before the concerned expression returned like a switch being flipped. How are you feeling, Elena? He asked, his voice taking on a different tone, more intimate and threatening despite the gentle words. Mrs. Rodriguez stared at him silently, her jaw set with the determination of someone who'd spent months planning this moment. Rico glanced at Carmen, Miguel, Rosa, and me. Could we have a moment alone? I'd like to say goodbye privately. We have some personal matters to discuss. Old friends, you understand? Actually, Mrs. Rodriguez said with surprising clarity, I'd like them to stay. Whatever you have to say can be said in front of my family and my nurse. No more secrets. Rico's smile faltered slightly, like a crack appearing in a mask. Elena, we need to take care of those insurance papers I mentioned on the phone earlier. Make sure everything's in order for your family's financial security. What insurance papers? Carmen asked suspiciously, her nursing instincts kicking in. I'm handling all of Mama's paperwork. I have medical power of attorney, and I've never heard of any insurance issues. Mrs. Rodriguez kept staring at Rico with steel in her dying eyes. Tell them about Diego, Rico. Tell them what you did to my grandson. Rico's face went pale, his friendly mask cracking further. You're confused, Elena. The medication is making you say strange things. Maybe we should let you rest. Tell them how you set up my grandson. How you've been bleeding me dry for 3 years while he rots in prison thinking his family abandoned him like garbage. Carmen looked between them, confusion and dawning horror spreading across her face like sunrise. What's he talking about, Mr. Montenegro? Rico forced a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She's hallucinating, I'm afraid. This is what happens at the end. People create elaborate fantasies, paranoid delusions. It's tragic, really, but quite common. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled weakly and nodded to me. Show them the recorder. I held up the digital device with shaking hands. Rico's eyes went wide, pupils dilating with panic as he realized he'd walked into a trap. What recorder? Miguel demanded. What the hell is going on here? Rico lunged for the device desperately, but I stepped back quickly. Security! I yelled as loud as I could, my voice echoing down the hallway. You stupid old woman! Rico snarled, his mask completely dropping now to reveal the predator underneath. You think this changes anything? Even if they believe your crazy story, Diego's still locked up in maximum security. Still thinks you hate him. Still lost 3 years of his life believing he was dead to his family. Not anymore, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered with deep satisfaction. She pulled out a cell phone from under her blanket. Somehow she'd been hiding it the entire time we'd been talking, planning every word of this confrontation. I called him yesterday, told him everything, the whole truth about what you did to him, to us, to our family for your sick revenge. Rico's face twisted with pure rage, spit flying from his mouth. That's impossible. I control all your communications. I had your phone service disconnected months ago when you couldn't make the payments. You controlled my landline, not this phone Carmen gave me last week for emergencies. Carmen gasped, understanding flooding her face. The phone was just supposed to be for calling 911 if you fell or had a medical emergency. This was my emergency, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Diego knows the truth now. He knows we never stopped loving him, never stopped believing in him, never gave up hope. Security officers appeared in the doorway, drawn by my shouts and the commotion. Rico looked around wildly like a trapped animal, realizing his 3-year scheme was collapsing around him. Ma'am, one officer said to me, we got a call about a disturbance. What's the situation here? I handed them the recorder with shaking hands. This man has been blackmailing Mrs. Rodriguez for 3 years. She's documented everything. This device contains recorded confessions of extortion, fraud, and conspiracy. Rico made a desperate grab for Mrs. Rodriguez's phone, but the officers restrained him before he could reach it, their training kicking in as they assessed the threat. You ruined everything, he screamed at her, spittle flying from his mouth as his composure completely shattered. 3 years of perfect planning. Do you have any idea how much work this took? How many details I had to coordinate? Tell them about the robbery, Mrs. Rodriguez said calmly, her voice getting weaker but her resolve unwavering. Tell them why you really wanted revenge on my family. Rico's face crumpled as the full weight of his situation crashed down on him like a building collapse. You don't understand what that kid did to me. He destroyed my store, my livelihood, 20 years of building my business from nothing. I lost everything because of your precious grandson and his selfish choices. So you decided to destroy our family in return, Carmen said, understanding flooding her face like sunrise after the darkest night. He deserved prison, Rico spat, his voice filled with 3 years of accumulated bitterness. Armed robbery, threatening innocent people with a loaded gun. But you people, always making excuses, always crying about your war hero grandson, getting sympathy from the whole neighborhood, special treatment everywhere you went, free meals, priority seating, discounts at stores. It made me sick watching you play the grieving grandmother while I rebuilt my life from scratch. So you decided to torture us instead of letting us heal naturally, I said, disgusted by this man's systematic cruelty. Rico laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the hospital walls. I decided to get justice and compensation for my losses. Your family owed me everything you paid over these 3 years and more. The officers began reading Rico his Miranda rights in practiced voices. As they prepared to lead him away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time with pure venom in his eyes. This won't bring back those 3 years, Elena. Diego still lost them. Still suffered in maximum security, getting beaten up by other inmates who thought he was abandoned trash. Still went to sleep every night thinking his family had written him off completely. You can't undo that psychological damage. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded sadly, tears flowing freely now. But he'll have the rest of his life knowing we love him unconditionally, that we never gave up on him, that we were victims too. That's what matters now. After Rico was led away in handcuffs, the family sat in stunned silence, trying to process the bombshell that had just exploded their understanding of the past 3 years. Mama, I feel like I'm losing my mind, Carmen said, staring at her hands. How is any of this real? Diego's been alive this whole time and we thought he was dead, very much alive. And according to what I learned yesterday when I finally got through to him, he's been studying for his GED in prison, taking college courses through correspondence programs, working in the prison library helping other inmates learn to read, trying to better himself despite believing his family had abandoned him completely. Miguel ran his hands through his hair. I visited his grave every month, brought flowers, talked to a headstone with nothing underneath it. The grave will be removed, Mrs. Rodriguez said. I've already contacted the cemetery. It was purchased under false pretenses. Carmen began crying again. What kind of person am I? My own nephew has been suffering in prison and I thought he was dead. I mourned him. I lit candles for his soul. You're the kind of person who loved him enough to grieve deeply, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. That love is still real. It's still there. Now you can share it with him while he's alive to receive it. Rosa, who had been silent through most of this revelation, finally spoke up. Can we call him tonight? Can we talk to Diego right now? Mrs. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since this conversation began. The numbers programmed in that phone, extension 447. He's expecting calls from family now that the no-contact order has been lifted. Carmen took the phone with trembling hands. What do I say? How do I explain 3 years of believing he was dead? How do I apologize for not being there? Tell him you love him, Mrs. Rodriguez whispered. Tell him we all love him. Everything else can be figured out later. As Carmen stepped into the hallway to make the call, Mrs. Rodriguez turned to me with exhausted but peaceful eyes. Thank you for listening, for believing me when this all sounded like the ramblings of a dying woman, for helping me get justice. Mrs. Rodriguez, I have to ask, why did you wait so long to act? Why didn't you expose Rico sooner and save yourself years of suffering? She smiled weakly. I was waiting for the right moment. When Rico couldn't escape justice, couldn't wiggle out of consequences or disappear like cockroaches do when lights come on. But you're dying. How is this the right moment? Because now he can't hurt anyone else in my family. And because, she paused, struggling for breath, because dying people tell the truth. When I expose Rico, people will believe me. They always believe someone with nothing left to lose, nothing to gain from lying. She closed her eyes peacefully. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes or violence. Sometimes it's just the truth, told at exactly the right moment to exactly the right people. Mrs. Rodriguez passed away 4 hours later, holding Carmen's hand while Diego's voice came through the phone speaker, telling his grandmother he loved her and forgave everything. His last words to her were, "Thank you for saving me, abuela. Thank you for never giving up." The investigation into Rico Montenegro revealed a pattern of revenge-driven schemes targeting families of people who had wronged him over the past 15 years. 3 other families had been victimized in similar ways. Elaborate cons designed to inflict maximum psychological damage over extended periods. 6 months later, Diego was released from prison when Rico's conspiracy was fully exposed. The appeals court found that Rico had manipulated evidence and intimidated witnesses during Diego's original trial. The armed robbery conviction was overturned due to prosecutorial misconduct and the revelation that the primary victim had orchestrated a revenge plot. At Mrs. Rodriguez's grave on the first anniversary of her death, 3 generations of the Rodriguez family gathered for the first time in years. Diego, now working as a counselor for at-risk youth and taking college classes online, placed fresh flowers on his grandmother's headstone. The inscription read, "Elena Rodriguez, beloved mother, grandmother, she never stopped fighting for truth." Rico Montenegro was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for blackmail, fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, and civil rights violations. He'll serve his time in the same prison system where Diego spent 3 years believing his family had abandoned him, though they made sure to house him at a different facility for everyone's safety. Diego visits his grandmother's grave every Sunday, the same day his family used to visit what they thought was his final resting place. He brings photos of his new apartment, his college acceptance letters, his counseling certification. He tells her about the kids he's helping stay out of prison, about the second chances he's giving others because she gave him one. Carmen keeps the recorder in a safe deposit box, as a reminder that truth always finds a way to surface, even when buried under years of lies and manipulation. Sometimes justice takes time. Sometimes it requires someone brave enough to wait for the perfect moment to expose evil. But Mrs. Rodriguez was right. The truth always finds a way, especially when spoken by someone with nothing left to lose. The most shocking thing a dying person ever confessed to me wasn't just a secret. It was a masterpiece of patience, planning, and love that reached beyond the grave to save her grandson's future and destroy the man who had tortured her family for 3 years. My mother-in-law kept forgetting I was allergic to shellfish at every family dinner until I forgot she was allergic to penicillin. When Garrett and I got engaged, his mother Beatrice made it clear I wasn't good enough for her precious son. I was a public school teacher from the wrong side of town. She was old money with a trust fund and opinions about bloodlines. Our first family dinner, I politely mentioned my shellfish allergy while she served lobster bisque. She waved dismissively. "A little exposure builds tolerance," she said, ladling it into my bowl anyway. I pushed it aside and ate bread rolls for dinner. The second dinner, shrimp scampi. "Oh, I completely forgot," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm sure you can pick around them." By the fourth dinner, crab cakes, I realized this wasn't forgetfulness. It was warfare. For 3 years, every family gathering featured shellfish prominently, shrimp cocktail appetizers, lobster mac and cheese, even Caesar salads garnished with anchovies. Each time, Beatrice would gasp dramatically. "How could I forget?" she'd exclaim while I sat hungry, watching everyone else eat. Garrett thought his mother was just scattered. "She means well," he'd say. "She's getting older." But I caught her Googling shellfish allergy severity on her phone during Christmas dinner. She knew exactly what she was doing. The breaking point came at Garrett's birthday party last month. 24 guests, elegant catering, and a 5-course meal centered entirely around a raw oyster bar. Not a single safe option for me. As I sat there, lightheaded from hunger, Beatrice announced loudly, "I'm so sorry, dear. I completely spaced on your little seafood issue again." Little seafood issue. Like my throat closing could kill me. That's when I noticed her purse hanging open. Inside was her medication organizer, clearly labeled with her daily pills, including the bright yellow capsules I recognized from my nursing rotation, penicillin for her chronic bronchitis. An idea formed. The next family dinner was at our house. I spent days planning the menu. Herb-crusted chicken, roasted vegetables, fresh bread. Everything looked perfect and safe. What Beatrice didn't know was that I'd mixed crushed penicillin tablets into her special portion of the herb crust, just enough to trigger her allergy, the same way she'd been trying to trigger mine for years. Halfway through dinner, she started wheezing. "Are you okay?" I asked with genuine concern, reaching for her water glass. Her face was turning red, small hives appearing on her neck. I don't understand, she gasped. This shouldn't be happening. What's your allergy again? I asked innocently, as if I'd forgotten. Penicillin, she wheezed, panic creeping into her voice. I nodded thoughtfully. Right. I completely forgot about that when I was preparing dinner. Garrett jumped up to get her EpiPen while I calmly cleared her plate. As the ambulance arrived, Beatrice grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. You did this on purpose, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I leaned close and smiled, the same empty smile she'd given me for years. Prove it. At the hospital, while she recovered, I sat with her insurance paperwork. That's when I discovered something that changed everything. Her allergy wasn't just to penicillin. According to her medical records, she was also severely allergic to shellfish. She'd been risking her own life every time she tried to poison mine. The revelation hit me like ice water. For 3 years, I'd watched this woman serve herself generous portions of every shellfish dish she'd prepared to torment me. Beatrice had been playing Russian roulette at every family dinner, gambling that her antihistamines would keep her safe while she slowly tried to kill me. When the nurse asked if I knew about any medications Beatrice was taking, I mentioned the antihistamines I'd seen her pop before every meal. The doctor's face darkened. She's been masking a severe shellfish allergy, he said. For how long? Years, I admitted. She serves shellfish at every family gathering. The doctor shook his head. She could have died from anaphylactic shock at any time. Who prescribed those antihistamines for daily use? I didn't know, but I suspected Beatrice had been self-medicating. Garrett arrived as they were discussing her treatment plan. His face was pale, hands shaking as he signed consent forms. I don't understand, he kept saying. She loves seafood. She's always eaten it. The doctor explained how some people develop allergies later in life, but Beatrice's reaction suggested a long-standing sensitivity she'd been hiding. That night, Garrett and I sat in the hospital cafeteria, picking at vending machine sandwiches. Something doesn't add up, he said finally. She knew about your allergy. She's been planning these menus for years. Why would she risk her own life just to spite you? I'd been wondering the same thing. The level of hatred required to potentially kill yourself while trying to hurt someone else suggested something deeper than simple disapproval. When Beatrice was stable enough for visitors, she refused to see me. She'd only talk to Garrett, and even then, her answers were vague. I don't remember what I ate, she'd claim. Maybe I grabbed the wrong plate, but I knew she remembered everything. I'd seen the calculation in her eyes for 3 years. 2 days later, Garrett's sister Penelope arrived from Seattle. She was 5 years older than Garrett, a successful attorney who'd moved across the country after law school and rarely visited. I need to tell you something about Mother, she said, pulling Garrett aside. I wasn't supposed to hear, but their hushed conversation carried across the hospital waiting room. She's been taking medication to suppress her shellfish allergy for over a decade, Penelope whispered. I found the prescription bottles when I was cleaning out Dad's things after the funeral. Garrett's father had died 2 years before I met him. Beatrice never talked about the marriage, only about maintaining the family legacy. Why would she hide that? Garrett asked. Penelope hesitated. Because Dad was allergic to shellfish too. It's how he died. The room went silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. What do you mean? Garrett's voice was barely audible. The official cause was heart failure, Penelope continued, but I found his medical records. He'd eaten contaminated shellfish at a business dinner, had a severe allergic reaction that triggered cardiac arrest. My mind raced. Beatrice's husband had died from the same allergy she'd been hiding, the same allergy she'd been forcing me to risk. She blamed herself, Penelope said. She'd prepared the hors d'oeuvres for that dinner. She'd forgotten to tell the caterer about his allergy. Suddenly, everything made sense. Beatrice hadn't been trying to kill me out of simple hatred. She'd been reenacting her husband's death, over and over, with me as the victim and herself as the negligent party who forgot about allergies. It was twisted grief masquerading as malice. But understanding her motivation didn't excuse 3 years of attempted poisoning. When Beatrice was released from the hospital, she came to our house to collect some belongings she'd left. I was alone, Garrett having gone to pick up her prescriptions. She stood in our kitchen, looking smaller and frailer than I'd ever seen her. I know what you did, she said quietly. Which time? I asked. When I defended myself against your attempts to hurt me, or when I discovered you'd been risking your own life to do it. She flinched as if I'd slapped her. You don't understand, she said. Then explain it to me, I replied, crossing my arms. Explain why you've spent 3 years trying to trigger a potentially fatal allergic reaction in your son's wife. Beatrice's composure cracked. She sank into a kitchen chair, looking every one of her 72 years. I killed him, she whispered. Who? Theodore. Garrett's father. Her voice broke. I prepared appetizers for his business dinner, crab puffs. I knew he was allergic, but I'd done it so many times before with medication that I thought she couldn't finish. The full picture emerged slowly. Theodore had been taking experimental allergy medications for years, allowing him to eat shellfish in social situations. Beatrice had enabled this dangerous habit, serving seafood at home so he could build tolerance. The night he died, his medication had worn off. The crab in the appetizer sent him into anaphylactic shock so severe it caused a heart attack. The paramedics said if I'd called sooner, she trailed off. But I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. She looked up at me with hollow eyes. When you told us about your allergy, all I could see was Theodore. Another person I'd have to remember to protect. Another person I'd eventually forget and kill. Her twisted logic finally made sense. By deliberately triggering my allergy in controlled settings, she thought she was proving I was too weak for her family. If I couldn't survive her dinner parties, I certainly couldn't survive a lifetime of potential exposure. It was a grotesque stress test, disguised as casual cruelty. So you decided to test me to death instead? I asked. I decided to see if you were strong enough, she said. If you could advocate for yourself, if you could protect yourself when others failed. By slowly poisoning me, by seeing if you'd speak up, fight back, leave if necessary. She met my eyes. Theodore never fought back. He just took his pills and trusted me to remember. That trust killed him. The irony was staggering. She'd been terrorizing me to make sure I wasn't like her dead husband, passive and dependent on others for safety. You're insane, I said. Maybe, she agreed. But you're alive, and you fought back. That's more than Theodore ever did. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how many nights I'd lain awake wondering if my throat would close while I slept, how I'd started carrying 3 EpiPens everywhere, how I'd developed anxiety around family dinners that made me physically ill. Instead, I asked the question that had been haunting me since the hospital. Why didn't you just tell Garrett the truth? About your allergy? About your husband? About what you were doing? Beatrice laughed bitterly. Because then he'd know his mother is a murderer who spent 20 years taking pills to eat the food that killed his father. The depth of her self-hatred was staggering. She'd been punishing herself for 2 decades, then projecting that punishment onto me. Garrett deserves to know, I said. Garrett deserves better than both of us, she replied, standing to leave. But he chose you, and you passed the test. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, processing everything. The woman who'd been trying to kill me for 3 years had been slowly killing herself the entire time. Her daily antihistamines weren't just masking her allergy, they were her penance for forgetting her husband's. When Garrett returned with her medications, I told him everything. About the deliberately poisoned dinners, about his father's real cause of death, about his mother's hidden allergy and daily self-medication. He listened in silence, the prescription bottles clutched in his hands. She's been eating shellfish this whole time? He asked finally. Every single dinner. While drugged with antihistamines to prevent the reaction that killed your father, Garrett stared at the pills, including the daily antihistamines that had been keeping his mother alive through her own twisted ritual. We have to stop this, he said. But when we arrived at Beatrice's house the next morning, we found her sitting at her dining room table, with an empty pill bottle beside her. She'd taken all of her antihistamines at once, then eaten a bowl of shrimp scampi. The ambulance arrived too late. The suicide note was brief. I can't forget anymore. Tell Garrett his father's death wasn't an accident. I chose the menu that night. B. At the funeral, Garrett's extended family whispered about her sudden shellfish allergy, how tragic it was that she'd forgotten her EpiPen. Only Garrett, Penelope, and I knew the truth. The will reading revealed one final twist. Beatrice had left everything to a foundation researching food allergy treatments, except for one item, a wooden recipe box that came to me. Inside were hundreds of recipes, all featuring shellfish. But underneath, wrapped in tissue paper, was a different collection. Every safe meal she'd ever researched for me. Dozens of allergy-friendly recipes she'd tested but never served. At the bottom was a note, for when you have children, they shouldn't suffer for their parents' failures. B. Garrett and I moved away 6 months later. We bought a small house in Vermont, far from his family's long shadow. I teach kindergarten now. He works as a carpenter, building furniture with his hands instead of managing his family's investments. We host dinner parties where everyone feels safe. Last month, we learned I'm pregnant. When I told Garrett, he immediately pulled out his phone to research pregnancy-safe foods and medications. He's already ordered medical alert bracelets for the baby just in case they inherit my allergies. I'm not taking any chances, he said, holding my hands. Never again. That night, I opened Beatrice's recipe box and found a section I'd missed. Baby's first foods. Allergy safe. She'd been planning for grandchildren she'd never meet, creating recipes to protect them from the dangers she'd spent years inflicting on me. I kept 3 of her recipes. The rest I buried in our backyard, under the apple tree Garrett planted when we moved in. The tree is thriving now, fed by the decomposing remnants of years of weaponized meals. Sometimes I catch Garrett staring at it, and I know he's thinking about his mother, about how love can become so twisted it resembles hatred, about how protecting someone can become a way of hurting them. But mostly, he thinks about the future, about raising children who never have to fear dinner invitations from the people who claim to love them. Our baby is due in March. We've already decided. No family traditions involving food allergies. No tests disguised as care. No love that requires survival. When people ask about Beatrice, I tell them she was complicated, that she loved her family in ways that sometimes hurt, that she carried guilt that eventually consumed her. I don't tell them about the years of deliberate poisoning, about the fear that lived in my throat every time I entered her house, about the relief I felt when she died. Some stories are too dark to share at baby showers, but I keep her final recipe collection, not to honor her memory, but to honor the children who will never know the specific terror of having their safety depend on someone else's memory. Our daughter will grow up knowing that protection isn't conditional, that love doesn't require endurance tests, that the people who claim to care for you should never make you fear for your life. When she's old enough, I'll tell her about her grandmother, about how good intentions can become weapons, about how grief can poison everything it touches. But first, I'll teach her to cook for herself, to read every ingredient label, to never depend on someone else's memory when her life is at stake. The apple tree grows taller every year, its roots deep in the rich soil we fed it. This spring, when our daughter arrives, we'll pick its fruit together. We'll make applesauce from apples grown on the remains of dangerous love, and she'll never know that the sweetness comes from something bitter buried beneath. 6 months after Beatrice died, Penelope sent me a box of items from their mother's house. Among the china and silver was a leather journal, locked with a small brass clasp. The key was taped to the back cover. Inside were entries dating back 23 years, from just after Theodore's death until the week before her own. The early entries revealed a woman consumed by guilt. She'd known about Theodore's experimental allergy medication, but had convinced herself it was safe because his doctor had approved it. The night he died, she'd served crab puffs because they were his favorite, forgetting that his prescription had lapsed. She blamed herself for trusting the medication, for not double-checking his pills, for choosing a menu that would kill him. But as the entries progressed, her grief transformed into something darker. She became obsessed with food allergies, researching every case study, every treatment failure, every preventable death. Allergic people are weak, she'd written. They depend on others to keep them safe. Theodore was weak. He trusted me instead of protecting himself. Page after page detailed her growing conviction that people with allergies were evolutionary failures who deserved their fate. She'd convinced herself that Theodore's death was natural selection, not her mistake. When Garrett introduced me, her journal entries became focused and predatory. Another weak one, she'd written after our first dinner, expects others to accommodate her defects. Garrett needs to see what happens when protection fails. The most chilling entry was from the night before Garrett's birthday party. 3 years of exposure and she still hasn't developed tolerance. Maybe she needs a stronger dose. If she's truly meant for this family, she'll survive. If not, Garrett will thank me for revealing her weakness. She'd been escalating systematically, each dinner featuring more concentrated allergens than the last. The raw oyster bar wasn't forgetfulness. It was attempted murder disguised as a family celebration. But the final entry, written the morning she killed herself, revealed the truth that shattered everything I thought I understood. She fought back, used my own weapon against me. She's stronger than Theodore ever was, strong enough to protect her children, maybe strong enough to forgive me. But I'm too weak to ask. Beatrice had poisoned herself because I'd proven I was exactly what she'd been testing for. Someone who would fight back when threatened. Her suicide wasn't despair. It was satisfaction. She'd finally found someone strong enough to protect her son. I showed the journal to Garrett that night. He read it in silence, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and finally, a terrible understanding. She killed herself because you passed her test? He asked. She killed herself because she realized she'd become the weak one, I said. She'd spent 20 years punishing herself for your father's death. When she saw that I was willing to fight back, she knew she could stop. We burned the journal in our fireplace that night, watching years of twisted logic and poisonous love turn to ash. But I kept one entry, the last one, not as a memento, but as a reminder. Love that requires tests isn't love. Protection that creates danger isn't protection. And strength isn't measured by how much abuse you can endure. Our daughter kicks strongly now, responding to Garrett's voice when he talks to my belly. We've read every book on food allergies, created emergency action plans, and installed air purifiers throughout the house. But more importantly, we've promised each other something Beatrice and Theodore never did. We'll communicate about danger instead of hiding it. We'll ask for help instead of suffering in silence. We'll protect each other without keeping score. The apple tree bloomed early this year, heavy with white flowers that smell like hope. Garrett built a swing beneath it, ready for when our daughter is old enough to play in the yard. Sometimes I imagine Beatrice watching from whatever place holds twisted souls. I wonder if she's proud that her final test worked, that she found someone strong enough to break the cycle of dangerous love her family had perfected. But mostly, I focus on the future, on raising a daughter who will never confuse cruelty with care, who will trust her instincts when someone claims to have forgotten something important, who will walk away from anyone who makes her survival a game. The recipes I saved from Beatrice's collection are simple: pureed fruits, soft vegetables, breast milk alternatives, food meant to nourish without harm, food prepared by someone who wanted to protect rather than test. When I make these recipes for my daughter, I'll remember that love doesn't require proving yourself worthy of survival, that the people who care for you should make your world safer, not more dangerous. And if anyone ever tries to forget my daughter's allergies, they'll discover that I learned more from Beatrice than just how to fight back. I learned how to win. The investigation into Beatrice's death was brief. The coroner ruled it suicide by intentional allergen exposure. The family accepted this explanation, grateful to avoid a deeper inquiry into her mental state. Only Detective Martinez seemed suspicious. He'd worked Theodore's case 20 years earlier and remembered Beatrice's behavior at the scene. She kept apologizing for the wrong things, he told me during a follow-up interview. Most people apologize for not calling the ambulance fast enough, for not knowing CPR. She kept apologizing for the food. He'd reviewed the old case files and noticed patterns I hadn't considered. Theodore's allergy attacks had been increasing in frequency and severity during the months before his death. His medical records showed multiple ER visits for accidental exposure to shellfish. Your mother-in-law was practicing, Detective Martinez said, testing how much he could handle, building up to that final dinner. The realization was horrifying. Beatrice hadn't accidentally killed her husband. She'd been systematically poisoning him, just like she'd done to me, until his body finally gave out. Why didn't you investigate further when it happened? I asked. Martinez shrugged. Rich family, respected businessman, clear medical cause of death. No one suspected the grieving widow. Besides, who kills their spouse with food allergies? It seemed too bizarre to be intentional. But it wasn't bizarre if you understood Beatrice's psychology. She'd been murdering the people she claimed to love, then torturing herself with guilt for the rest of her life. The pattern was clear. Target someone with allergies, gradually escalate exposure while pretending to forget, then blame yourself when they finally succumb. Theodore had been victim number 1. I was supposed to be victim number 2. What happens now? I asked Martinez. Now? Nothing. Both perpetrator and primary victim are dead. Case closed. He paused. But you might want to consider that your mother-in-law was likely planning a third victim. My blood went cold. What do you mean? Her journal mentioned wanting to see if your children would inherit your weakness. She was already researching infant allergy development. The thought of Beatrice testing my unborn children the same way she'd tested me was unbearable. She'd planned to continue her twisted experiments across generations. When I told Garrett about Martinez's theory, he went silent for a long time. She would have killed our baby, he said finally. Or tried to. I agreed. Until she decided they were strong enough to survive or weak enough to die. That night, Garrett called Penelope with new questions about their childhood. Had Beatrice ever forgotten about Penelope's lactose intolerance? Had there been strange accidents or illnesses that seemed connected to food? Penelope's answers were disturbing. She'd suffered from mysterious stomach problems throughout childhood that doctors couldn't explain. Problems that disappeared when she left for college and stopped eating Beatrice's cooking. I always assumed I'd outgrown my sensitivity, Penelope said. But now that I think about it, Mother kept insisting I needed to build tolerance. She'd slip dairy into my food and act surprised when I got sick. Beatrice had been experimenting on her own children for decades. Garrett and I spent the next week going through family medical records, looking for patterns. What we found was a systematic campaign of controlled poisoning spanning 25 years. Garrett's cousin Devin, who'd visited every summer as a child, had severe hay fever that mysteriously worsened during his stays. Beatrice had been putting fresh-cut flowers in his bedroom, claiming she'd forgotten about his allergies. Garrett's uncle Richard had stopped attending family gatherings after developing violent food poisoning every time he ate Beatrice's cooking. He'd blamed it on his sensitive stomach, not realizing she'd been testing his tolerance for contaminated ingredients. Even Garrett hadn't been spared. His childhood asthma attacks had always been worst at home, triggered by cleaning products Beatrice claimed were necessary for proper housekeeping. She'd been poisoning him with chemical fumes while documenting his respiratory responses. The family wasn't just dysfunctional, it was a decades-long medical experiment conducted by a woman convinced she was strengthening her loved ones by slowly killing them. How many people did she hurt? Garrett asked, staring at the evidence we'd compiled. Everyone, I realized. She hurt everyone who couldn't fight back. We considered going to the police with our findings, but Detective Martinez was right. Both perpetrator and primary victim were dead. The statute of limitations had expired on most of the poisonings, and proving intentional harm would require admitting that I'd poisoned her in return. Instead, we sent anonymous letters to every family member we could identify, warning them to get tested for chronic poisoning and to review their medical histories for unexplained symptoms during family visits. Most thought we were conspiracy theorists. A few thanked us quietly. Devin got tested and discovered heavy metal poisoning from the antique silverware Beatrice had insisted on using during his visits. The family heirlooms had been leaching lead into his food for years. Uncle Richard's daughter called to tell us he'd finally gotten proper treatment for what doctors now recognized as chronic bacterial poisoning, not irritable bowel syndrome. Penelope had the most dramatic response. She'd been suffering from mysterious autoimmune symptoms for 15 years, symptoms that doctors now linked to chronic low-level dairy exposure during her childhood. She gave me a lifelong illness, Penelope said during our last phone call. All those years I thought I was sick because something was wrong with me, but it was her. It was always her. The family disintegrated after that. No one wanted to risk another gathering where food might be weaponized. Holiday celebrations became awkward phone calls. The family estate went unsold because no one trusted that Beatrice hadn't contaminated it somehow. Garrett and I were fine with the isolation. We'd learned that some family traditions deserve to die. Our daughter was born on a snowy morning in March. We named her Hope, not because we're optimistic people, but because we wanted her to embody the possibility of breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them. Her first food was breast milk, then carefully prepared organic purees that I made myself in our own kitchen, with ingredients I'd personally selected. When Hope was 6 months old, Penelope visited to meet her niece. She brought a gift, a cookbook of simple, safe recipes for children with food sensitivities. I want her to have choices, Penelope said, watching Hope grab at colorful baby food. Real choices, not tests disguised as meals. As Hope grew, we taught her to trust her body's signals. If something tastes wrong, spit it out. If someone insists you eat something that makes you uncomfortable, say no. If anyone tries to convince you that discomfort builds character, walk away. By age 2, Hope had developed her own food preferences and could clearly communicate when something didn't agree with her. She'd never known the fear of wondering if a meal might hurt her. One evening, while Hope played with wooden blocks Garrett had made, I found myself thinking about Beatrice's final test. She'd been right about one thing. I was strong enough to fight back when threatened, but she'd been wrong about everything else. Strength isn't about surviving poisoning. It's about creating environments where poisoning isn't necessary. Love isn't about proving you can endure cruelty. It's about ensuring cruelty never becomes an option. Hope looked up from her blocks and smiled, babbling in the universal language of content babies. She'll never know that her happiness is built on the foundation of her grandmother's destruction, that her safety comes from our willingness to abandon everything familiar and dangerous. And she'll never have to pass tests to earn love. When Hope starts school, she'll carry an emergency medical kit and know how to use it. But more importantly, she'll carry the knowledge that she deserves people who remember her needs without being reminded. She'll never thank someone for not poisoning her. She'll never think that survival equals strength. And if anyone ever tries to test her worthiness through cruelty, she'll know exactly what to do: leave. Because the best response to dangerous love isn't endurance. its escape. The apple tree in our yard has grown tall enough now that its branches tap against Hope's nursery window when the wind blows. She laughs at the sound, thinking the tree is saying hello. I like to imagine it is. That growth can be gentle, that protection can be simple, that love can nourish instead of starve. Beatrice's legacy lives in that tree, not as the poison she planted, but as the fertile ground her destruction created for something better to grow. Hope will climb that tree someday, reaching for apples that taste only of sweetness. She'll never taste the bitterness buried in its roots. And that's exactly how it should be. Some cycles break with violence. Others break with the simple act of choosing different soil. Our daughter grows in better earth than either Garrett or I ever knew. Earth fed by the remains of toxic traditions we refuse to continue. The tree keeps growing, hope keeps laughing, and the buried recipes turn to compost, feeding something beautiful instead of something deadly. That's the real victory over Beatrice's legacy. Not that I survived her tests, but that Hope will never need to take them.